having you on the podcast gives us this insight to multiple industries from a digitization perspective, and we get the opportunity to learn about what you're doing with the current venture. And I love doing that. It's challenging, it's hard, but I think it resonates. And I can tell that you're passionate about all these subjects because you're in those trenches from these different perspectives. And I think that makes a big impact. CMMS Radio talks about all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, focused on maintenance management. It's the people, the process, and the culture that make your CMMS journey a success. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we've got a really special guest. It's going to be a little bit of a unique journey on this episode. There's a company out there called Glasshouse.biz, and today we're going to meet the founder and CEO. It's Jimmy Speyer. And Glasshouse is a customer intelligence platform for the trades services businesses. And they're creating transparency in markets and helping small and mid-sized businesses find their very best customers. Now, for everyone out there going, well, what does this have to do with CMMS? Everybody knows I'm all about the skilled trades. This has an impact in that arena. That's very important to me. But Jimmy himself, I see him as a serial entrepreneur in this idea that he's plugged into what's really happening in different businesses. And he's got a lot of experience with this concept of digitization, which a lot of you know I like to talk about because CMMS is a form of that. So we're going to go a little bit off the beaten path, but really get some good things to think about and get into the journey story, from Jimmy's background and how he gets to where he is today. So Jimmy, welcome to CMMS Radio.
All right. Thanks for having me. I'm super stoked to be here.
Yeah, it's cool how this got set up and how kind of worlds collide. And, we're all out there on LinkedIn trying to do good stuff. And, I think first and foremost, like I had said there in the intro, I want to get into your background, and you can go back as far as you want to and kind of bring us up to today. But I'm pretty fascinated by the things you've done with digitization because it's from that alternate view. So what happens in the world of CMMS and companies digitizing for maintenance management and getting good data that they can really learn from and continue to improve as an organization. A lot of people don't see the business side of things. They see what they do on a day-to-day, but you've been in different roles where you're connecting those things to the business to drive value and progress. So give us a little bit of your background, how it all started, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I spent I spent 15 years in digital transformations, but really in three different verticals, always in software. Out of college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Went to University of Minnesota, and I didn't have any idea of what that was going to be. I tried a couple of corporate jobs. It wasn't working in an office at the time, really wasn't for me. And so I was working in restaurants when I was in college. They asked me if I wanted to run the place. I was like, I'll try this out. And so I learned a lot working in restaurants, and I learned about the systems and operations, and you have to learn how to do inventory, and you've got equipment, you've got all this stuff, right? So there's applications to running a small business, but also to systems and tools and things like that. And I kind of just lucked into, frankly, figuring out how to turn that into a career in technology. And my wife actually found a job posting on Craigslist, of all things. This is like 15 years ago. And for a job at a back office inventory management solution for restaurants. I said, this is perfect for me. I like computers. I don't want to necessarily work till 3 o'clock in the morning anymore because I want to have a family. But how do I make that work together? And I found this company. They were real small, and it really taught me about how you could take tools and systems and apply them to a real world business, to people actually doing something in the real world, buying food, selling food, counting food, whatever it is, but do it with software. And I fell in love with that. It was really cool. And at the time, it was a real small company, so they let you do everything. So I implemented the software, helped design software, sold software. I taught myself accounting. I learned how to code. I learned it all. And I always say to people, if you have a chance to go to a small company that's, lets you try a lot of different jobs when you're early in your career, you should do it. Because how bad could you possibly screw up your life at that age that you can't fix it? So you'll learn a lot of stuff. You'll fail a bunch, you'll learn a bunch. It'll be really cool, actually, if you have a good leadership who lets you do those things. So I did that in restaurant technology. I built a couple of restaurant technology revenue organizations. It was really cool to be on the front end of digitizing restaurant accounting and back office tooling and see how that would make a big impact on a really big industry. From there, I also went to another place that was doing digitization for medical device. And so that's another kind of like real world thing, right? So you're doing software that impacts a real world thing. That knee implant is going in someone's body, right? That catheter, that whatever thing is going to touch a human being, or incubators, all kinds of really cool stuff. Helping kids walk was one of them, which was really awesome. And so we did software that helped them get cleared by the FDA, helped them make good products. And so you could really tangibly see how fixing a process that was fundamentally broken or disjointed and turning it into somebody's day-to-day experience and ultimately somebody's life experience of having that heart valve replacement. You can see how software would track through that. It was really fun and really interesting. And then again, changing that process and getting it into the real world. And then the third one, so I'll do all three of my stops, was, or my big ones, was going to logistics technology and how you move things all the way from one side of the globe to the other. So, once it gets off the boat, it's got to hit a truck, it's got to hit a warehouse, it's got to hit another truck, it's got to hit the store, it's got to hit your house. But, how do you track that thing and create visibility all the way from the manufacturer, from the factory to your front door? And if you knew how many pieces of paper slid across how many desks traditionally to do that, your mind would reel. So how do you create a process that impacts that so that it can get there on time at the right cost? So, really during COVID, it exposed this problem. And so getting to be part of that digitization there and just seeing that process, digitization is a buzzword, but to me, the important part is what you're doing beyond theory and into a real world life impact where somebody else says, this is better now. I'm happier now because of what you did. It's not just, oh, we created 5% efficiency. It's somebody felt the impact beyond just the P&L. That's what I think about.
So just right there with just that portion of the journey story, we've touched facilities management, we've touched restaurants from an operational perspective and otherwise. We've tied in things like accounting and finance, inventory, huge. Then we've gone to things related to supply chain and logistics. And you mentioned manufacturing, where all of this is somehow connected. And I like a good challenge where we get an opportunity to showcase a great guest with experiences that could be, should be, and actually are connected to what we do in this big bad world of maintenance management, maintenance operations. I've talked to people that run restaurants or provide technology to drive that process because it's about the equipment and ultimately the patrons and the frontline workforce. All of that stuff plays pretty well here on CMMS Radio. So I love the way it's kind of stitched together. It's eclectic, but it's all very related. And you said something else. The idea of digitization being a buzzword is really because once it's a thing, everybody on the planet is like, how can we leverage this to get more visibility and drive demand? And for me, it's like, that's a bunch of hogwash. I like why you kind of framed it that way, because you're trying to make an impact for the frontline workforce, the business as a whole, everybody in between. That touches the clients, the end user clients, whether you're in the restaurant industry and they're actually buying your food and enjoying, or otherwise. So now, how does all of that lead us into the exact venture you're doing today, and what's that all about?
So I'll give you a real world example of what we're doing, and then we'll talk about how that applies to the market opportunity, right? So to me, it's about making the impact. One of the things I learned really, really early on in this journey was teaching restaurants how to look at a P&L and L and run reports. And we're doing this software, and you got to teach people how to use it. And I was in charge of teaching them. So, Jimmy, you're going to teach me how to use the software. Cool. So I better know what I'm talking about. So I've got to learn how to use the software so I can teach it. And what I came to was, you're teaching people how to read a report. And so people get really hung up on the numbers. And what I taught them is the numbers are a report of the behavior. The numbers are the numerical manifestation of somebody else's lived experience or their behavior or what they're doing. If we want to change that number, we're going to have to change that behavior. Or if we want to improve that outcome for the business, we're going to have to change some other input. It's really human centric. And so take that concept, put it in what we're doing. Every home service business, so the trades, we call it skilled trades, plumbing, electrical, window washing, pest control. If it touches your house, they all want to grow. And they're all trying to get more customers, service their customers, try to be efficient, try to make money. It's a lot of small to medium-sized businesses. And you want to tell your staff in that space, we need to knock on the doors of the neighbors, or we need to open up some more opportunities, or we need to do these things to drive revenue. Driving the revenue, that's the P&L side of it. How do we change the behavior? How does software impact the human aspect of this? So you could say, just knock on more doors. Greg, you're knocking on 2 doors a day. I need you to knock on 20. Right? Maybe that would be better for the outcome to the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that necessarily better for Greg?
Depends, but probably not.
I mean, maybe financially it could be if we incentivize you that way. But what if you're already working 40, 50 hours a week and we're just putting more on your plate? You still got to service the accounts. We're not taking stuff away. We're just adding more on because we have a P&L driven desire. And so what we want to do with Glasshouse is basically enable that part to happen. We're going to help you knock on 20 doors essentially without having to spend any time doing it. So we call it digital door knocking. So every time you do a job now, Greg, you're going to go to that neighborhood. It's going to pull up the 20 houses around you, or the 30, or the 50, or the 4, and you can call them, email them, text message them, put them in your advertising. You can basically have something get mailed to them, so you're leaving something behind. But instead of having to walk to 20 doors, you're digitally enabling that process and then being able to engage with those buyers. What we do is we unlock that neighborhood for you so that all of your jobs are allowing you to do this part of your job that is really antiquated when you think about pushing paper around a desk, and let's get rid of that. Knocking on someone's door existed forever since there were doors. So how do we digitize that process? Because that impacts Greg. He can do all his jobs now and knock on those doors, and I didn't add any time to him. I probably took some away.
Yeah, and there's one other thing that I wanted to share, because like obviously in the commercial world and with businesses, this is quite similar, but um I'm a person that has a home, and I get those people hitting the door, and it's kind of frequent, and I don't love it. And I think this also is beneficial to the consumer, regardless of where they are. That way, because if the buyer has changed and they don't want you knocking on their door, let alone the fact that you don't have the resources or the time, right? Like Greg doesn't have the time, if he's doing 40 to 50 hours a week, to actually add 20 extra doors a day or whatever it might be. It's going to be relatively impossible. Plus, it's hot out and all that stuff. But the actual people in that neighborhood would probably appreciate that a lot more, because then they can say, oh, okay, I know about you. And they can ignore it, or they can say, oh, I didn't know that. Let me reach out to these people. I've always wanted to learn about that. I want to do that same service. And so it all starts to kind of tie together and make it efficient for everyone, not just the organizations that are utilizing it. So it's great stuff. Now, with that overall approach, and then your background in these other aspects of digitization and working in businesses, you also kind of touched on something about behavior versus the data that we're after. And it reminded me of this idea that if you show me how you measure me, I'll show you how I'm going to behave. And to really achieve any kind of process improvement or optimization, it's going to typically come down to human behavior, and or along with that, machine performance. Like if we were in a manufacturing environment trying to do the same thing and make our machines behave better, it's going to come down to the people. So have you seen that there's a challenge in behavioral change when orgs are trying to achieve that change without understanding those people better?
I guess what my experience there is that when you try to bring in a digital process, or really just change any process in general, if you're doing it purely for an efficiency driven outcome, but you don't pull the people into that understanding of what is the why. If you just say, we're going to do this because we're going to get 3% more efficient, like, why do we need to be like, why do we care about being 3% more efficient? Like, why do I, Jimmy, care about that? Like, well, because that will help our business grow. We can invest in better tools. We can do this. You can get a raise. Like, again, going back to the person who still has to do the thing, making them better without any context, I think you lose some relevance to the individual themselves, because you're right. It all just comes down to the people themselves. Unless you're like trying to fully automate humans out of a process entirely, in which case I don't think you're going to do a good job of getting them on board with that concept, regardless of what you say.
Right.
I don't think you're going to convince me that it's a good idea to fire me and let a robot do my job because it's better for me. So I think if you're trying to involve those people in that process, then get them involved in that process and understand why the hell they care. Why do I care? It's probably the first question anybody should ask before they start presenting somebody an idea that impacts them.
Yeah, somebody this week brought up, and we've heard this for years, what's in it for me? And, again, that's kind of buzzy as well, but it really is about that. Like, why does this matter, not just to us, but to me? And how does it all link together? And when you do that, you get a hell of a lot more buy-in, and people understand, oh, well, if I go along with this process, I get out of work on time more often, and things fail less, and people know more without having to call me on my cell phone on Saturday afternoon when I'm out with the wife and kids or whatever it might be. So those are the kind of approaches. And I love talking about this stuff because so many people get moving so fast, right? Everybody in the business world, oftentimes, especially in software, I'm always talking about how everybody's running around with their hair on fire, chasing vanity metrics, and missing what really matters about keeping these machines moving. I don't know. It's kind of it's almost like an intangible. So when you do this right and you involve teams and team members, then it just makes it that much better and that much more likely that people are going to succeed. If they're resistant to the change, which is the most common thing about change management that we all complain about, maybe not when we're recording. Like, why don't these people get it? Why won't they do it? And it's like, well, they're saying the same thing about you in leadership.
Like,
And
why do they make me keep doing this? Yeah. Why do they
yeah,
keep changing everything? It was working fine.
yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, I'll give you an example of this that I think you'll completely understand. When we deal in the world of CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, and we get leadership in a particular organization, let's pretend it's a restaurant group that owns 42 different locations spread out in these different regions, whatever it might be. They've got this great little system that they're using for day-to-day operations, break fix, blah, 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 all that stuff, right? We don't have to go down the wormhole there. And then a new leader comes in and says, well, I don't like system A. I don't know nothing about that. I don't like it. I'm changing to this system over here, system B. And they do that. And the whole team is like, we've been using this for 5 years. We use it well. It does what we need. We get incredible things done. We have a very low failure rate. And now we're changing this just because you don't like it. You don't like the way the dashboard looks. It's nonsense. And this happens all the time. People parachute in and they make all these changes because, again, they're forgetting who's actually using what and benefiting from it. And I think that comes back to, I want to ask you about this. This is a pretty direct question. When new leaders come into an org, have you ever noticed the tendency of they just stack, unpack, and restack boxes just because they need to be doing something? Is that too hard of a dig?
That's not short of a dig. So I've had an opportunity to be as a leadership role at a couple of, 3 different software companies and now my own. And I've seen many times that new leaders or new people will come into an organization and feel like they have to make a change for the sake of, or they have to make an impact. I've seen it where, especially, this is incredibly common in my experience, in not when you bring in a like top level leader, like maybe not the CFO or the COO or even a VP of, but often when you start to get into the manager and director levels in a multi-tiered organization, they have to come in and kind of show how valuable they are, or show like what their expertise is and why they're here. And usually the way to do that is to come in and say something else isn't working so that you can fix it, even if it's working fine. And oftentimes that's even come in and fix somebody else's thing. So, oh, you're in charge of day to day operations, and I got hired as a new head of director of analytics. So I'm going to come in and say, well, your tool sucks at analytics, and we have to rip it out and put in the one I like because it's better, and it doesn't, yours isn't any good. And I'm going to usurp your area of the business to maybe either carve out my own little fiefdom or whatever it is. Yeah, see it all the time. It's not uncommon. If it was not human nature, then you wouldn't see it so much. So it's clear there's something about us as people that wants to come in and do this kind of stuff. Um, I think it's the role of senior leaders who are the protectors of the culture of the organization and the overall stewards of the business itself and have been there and had some tenure to tell new leaders that their job is to come in and to consult with the team, not to come in and impose their will exclusively on the existing business, unless there is an agreed upon known issue that has to be fixed and you're hired for that specific purpose.
I love that. I love that. And it's not just to virtue signal and agree with you, because one of the most challenging things at all levels of an organization, when you have a certain responsibility and you're brought in, or even when you've been there and they say, hey, we've got this new project, and you're like, what's that? Why are we even looking at that? And the assessment part or phase where you talked about this more consultative approach to where are we now? Unless, of course, you were brought in, hey, we've got a real problem here. We know we have the problem. We're bringing you in to change it. It's first about taking that time to where do we have the parts that are working well? Where do we need a little grease and oil, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like that so much, but I think that's also where organizations struggle with any change, with the concept that you must first slow down before you can speed up. Is that a thing, like in your opinion or experience, where we want that time, we want to do these proper assessments, we want to have the meetings? Everybody hates meetings because you have meetings about the meetings that you're going to have later, and then you're going to get to the real meeting. It's a cliche, but it's a truism. That is where I think, because as a leader myself in the past, where we were growing a company, I would constantly find myself saying, man, I want to do more of this, and this, but I cannot, because if I do, then this, and this doesn't get done. And then if we bring someone in, we start to buy into this idea that they're going to make an impact in 2 weeks. And that's just kind of unrealistic. So with all that mumbo jumbo I was talking about, I mean, is that kind of in that same realm of what we're dancing about?
I think so. I mean, you have to come. It's all context. Let's talk about the context, Greg. Right. So you just fired your director of, you brought a new one in. You didn't bring that person in to keep things the same. Let's all be honest. If everything was working great, that other person would still be here.
Mm-hmm.
So something has to change. Even if it was just that person's behavior, you're going to have the new person come in and behave a different way. So there are changes that have to happen, or you wouldn't have a new person sitting in that chair, I guess, unless the person retires. If the gal retired, the guy retired, I guess we're saying it was the greatest thing ever. Could you just do what they did? That's about the only scenario I can think of where you're not asking for something to change. But how fast or slow you do it now depends on the severity of what needs to be fixed. If the culture that you have inherited as the new person is fundamentally broken, then you probably have to rebuild it. And every day that keeps going, it just gets harder to change. So you're going to have to do something and make some decisions with imperfect data. If it's process oriented, then you need to do a diagnosis to figure out what are the immediate problems, what can wait. And what I always think about is what is the easiest, fastest things that give us the best impact we can possibly do that everybody agrees are worth doing and that we should have done 16 years ago, but we couldn't because we've always done it that way used to be the reason. But I've never done anything that way here because I started yesterday. So I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
So it's contextual, which is a way of saying it depends. But if you want to move really fast, find those things where it's getting everybody to go with you really easily. And then the things that are going to take a lot more time and a lot more buy-in, you should be willing to build the buy-in and take the time.
And what's cool about the way you explained all that is you're not making assumptions. Like you're actually going to look for and find those quicker lifts. I want to be careful with easier lifts because nothing's really easy, but the quicker kind of payoff, return on investment, and more importantly, improvement to the culture and how everybody's moving together in the same direction, from the top
You
to
will
the
be
bottom.
amazed how much you will learn if you just ask and listen. What I was lucky enough to stumble into figuring out, I was a consultant so those three companies I told you about, the middle medical device one, I get to consult there for a month. If you ever have a chance to consult at a business before you go work there, it's the greatest job interview experience you'll ever have because you are shopping them, they are shopping you, and it's the interview process nowadays for hiring is almost like getting married on the first date. It's like, this is weird. Like we gotta like, hey, I'll have the pasta carbonara. What do you think? Should we do it? Okay, now man and wife, let's go. Like that's pretty quick. But if you get to hang out for a month or two, it's like, dating this person for a couple of years. You're like, yeah, we moved in together. We got checked up. It works. I like it. Let's do it. And so by doing that, I was there diagnosing problems and not really having all the ability to change whatever I wanted because it wasn't my organization.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to interview every single person. What do you think? What do you want? What do you like? What's working? What's not working? So that when I was decided to come work there full time pretty quickly, a month or two, it was because I really wanted to, because I knew I could make an impact and I knew exactly where to start.
And isn't that what when we are employers, is that not what we actually want when we grow our teams and add resources? We want that exact thing. Something I was taught years ago, and I kind of locked it in. Like when you're in an interview, the cattle call interview, all these questions that are being asked are asking you three essential things. Can you do the job? Will you do the job? And do you fit in with the organization, meaning the culture? And if you take that approach you just talked about, it is ideal because we get to work together before we actually work together.
I know that's not what your podcast is about, but just to this point, the way we hire people across industries, I don't think this is, in the trades, in technology, all over the place. It is very legal centric in the process where it's basically a set of imposed rules that are trying to, put you in a box and put you through a process. But it basically means that you can't ask certain types of questions. People don't want to give you certain types of answers. You're playing this dance on both sides. And then you get there and both parties hope that it works out. It's really not a strong amount of information that can be gleaned on either side in the amount of time that it generally is available to do it, right? People need a job, you want to hire, I can't ask you this, you can't answer that. We're going to hang out for about 3 hours, maybe 4 or 5 if I'm lucky, and then decide if we want to spend the next 10 years working together.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you, this is actually so related to CMMS radio. And I'm going to tell you why. It's for the exact reasons that you just explained it. And this is something we have all seen and struggled with. And as an organization, it's like, well, we don't have time to do it that way. Yep, I agree. You don't have time because you can't make the time because you've got other pressures. You got to hit that number. You're PE funded. We don't have time. We got to solve this problem in 3 weeks, right?
We used to do it even when I started. So, like in technology, I've been in 15 years now. It was far enough away or back enough that we were still doing something called shadowing back then, right? So you would bring somebody in for an interview, and this is old as time, right? This is not a new idea, right? This is how it used to work: is come in for half a day, 3 hours, whatever, and you're going to sit with 2 or 3 people, ask questions, see how they work. They're going to ask you questions, see what kind of questions you ask, and it was a little bit of a getting to know you period, but also them understanding here's what you're getting into period. which
Yeah.
I think is super important. And we don't really do that anymore, especially with remote work. It's really hard. And I think there's something lost there, because if you can figure out in 2 hours that this isn't a job that is going to be good for you, then you've saved yourself 6 months of either misery or, you know, the wasted time of continuing on with that process.
I would like to switch to the fun question segment that I do with all first-time CMMS radio guests.
Okay, shoot, let's go.
Question number 1. What is your favorite music?
My favorite Queen. So if I had to pick one album or one band to listen to for the rest of my life, I'd probably pick Queen.
All right. Good
Yeah.
stuff.
I like classic rock. I'd say a lot, but I'm pretty eclectic. Everyone says they listen to everything. I guess I listen to lots of different music, but I probably like you know the oldies they call them now, like Billy Joel, Queen, that kind of stuff. Probably a little bit more than anything else nowadays.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And there's a lot of substance there, folks. So if you don't listen to that kind of music, get out there and check it out a little bit. Give it a try.
Freddie Mercury is the best rock singer who ever lived, bar none, hands down. Best rock and roll vocals all time.
All right. You're not going to get any arguments from me. Plus, there's no wrong answers on CMMS Radio because it's all about thought-provoking stuff anyway. Number 2, fun question number 2. What is your favorite sport or hobby? And if it's a sport, it does not have to be one that you actually do or play. You could just be a big fan of it.
I coach my sons. I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, 2 boys, and I coach their lacrosse team. And I played lacrosse in college at the University of Minnesota. And I still go out there and get my ass handed to me once in a while. And so lacrosse would be my favorite sport by far.
Yeah, I got a couple of buddies that were lacrosse players, and it's no joke. That's all I can say about it.
I'm too old now to be any good. Your knees go first. So if lacrosse could be played from a standstill, I'd probably still be able to play because the stick skills go last, but the running definitely goes first.
Yeah. Yeah. And now, fun question number 3. No wrong answers here. Okay. So, what is your perspective, philosophy, opinion on the concept of work-life balance?
I get asked this question a lot. Actually, I just did a podcast with a buddy a while back. He asked this question. I don't believe in it for me. So actually, my perspective is everybody can make their own decision. But for me, it's not about work-life balance. It's about work-life integration. So I have a really good friend. He's a board member of our business. He's awesome, mentor. And he talks about how and I agree with this 100%. So I'm stealing it from him. If you try to balance them, then they're always trying to say that they cannot, that they're at odds with each other. Because if you work too much, it somehow is against your life. And it's to say that it's work life takes work out of your life. You're going to work 2,000 to 3,000 hours a year, depending on who you are, for years and years and years. I work probably 2,800, 3,000 hours a year. And I've been doing it for 15 years. So to say that those have to be in balance would say that a huge percent of my life isn't my life. So I work on how do I make it all stuff I want to be doing. Nobody talks about beach life balance. That's my example I like to give. Nobody's like, how do you think about the time you spend on the beach, Greg, versus your life? Like, what the hell is that? I go to the beach. It's fun. I like doing it. I feel the same way about my work. It's fun. I like doing it. If I hated it, if I'm constantly running away from it, then I should try to find something I want to run to and figure out a way to pay for me to make money doing that. And then I wouldn't have to feel like I was trying to get out of work all the time to get to my life. Anything, I suppose, can be overdone. So everything in moderation, including moderation, I would say. But I just generally don't try and build my life around a sense of work is over there, my life is over there. I just integrate them into one all-inclusive thing. By doing work I find interesting, meaningful, and like hard, because I want to do hard stuff. And then I pull my life into it 100%.
See, this is always good stuff, no matter what answer anybody gives, because it might help an individual, it might foster further critical thinking about this. Oh, I've never really thought about it that way. So for example, and I don't usually give any commentary after the fact, other than I typically tell people I like what they said, because there's almost always going to be something in there that resonates with me. But something you said here, and the reason I'm doing some commentary on what you said is, you said everything, in moderation, including moderation. In other words, it's not just balance, it's integration. So if everything's in moderation, you do that too much, then you're kind of doing it wrong. And I'm kind of a big fan of the idea of, be careful with dogmatic viewpoints, even though that in and of itself can become dogmatic. So it reminded me of that. I love that call out. So first of all, I want to make sure people know how to get in touch with you. So they can find you on LinkedIn, and it's Jimmy Speyer, Speyer. And the current venture is Glasshouse.biz, B-I-Z. So you can find them online. And if you connect with Jimmy and get your own conversations going, you can also find the company page on LinkedIn so you can learn a little bit about it. And I always like to do a little shout out so that people know how to get in touch with you, to have an awesome conversation like this, or to learn about this current business venture and any of the other things that you've done. I did that on LinkedIn so that I just knew a little bit about what I was going to talk about, but obviously I'm low prep, no prep. I want it to be like I bumped into you at a coffee shop or a conference. And I want to thank you for this time. It's Friday. We had to work on getting the schedule dialed in. It worked out really, really well. I had a blast with this conversation, Jimmy.
I really enjoyed it, Greg. I didn't know where we'd go with it, and we went in a lot of different directions, but I had a great time chatting with you, and I appreciate you getting me on today.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure, and we might do it again sometime. And
anytime, I'm here.
Have a great weekend.
Cool. Thanks, man.
You got it. Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.